Let me kind of just give you a quick rundown of the budget situation. As you know, I now serve on the House Budget Committee. This pie chart here pretty much tells it all. You see, this is the entire defense establishment. That's the entire United States military. Those are the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Libya. This is the other side of that. That's the defense discretionary spend, or non-defense discretionary spending. That's the rest of the federal government. So everything that we think of as the federal government is in these two pie slices right here. Can you all see that? It comes to about $1.3 trillion or so. The rest is what they call mandatory spending. This is the discretionary side. This is what we argue about in the budget. This all here is mandatory spending. That's spending that's not in the budget itself. It's basically entitlement. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the national debt, and other mandatory spending like unemployment insurance. Now here is the magnitude of the problem that our country faces. I know a lot of folks, in fact, let me get another show of hands real quick here. How many of you think that we should stop the deficit spending right now, no more increase in the debt limit? I get that everywhere. No more increase in the debt limit. No. Not another dime. Here is the problem with that. In order to make that happen, well, the problem is in order to make that happen, you've got to balance the budget immediately. Now here is how great, and you know that I've spent many years in government cutting budgets, or at least trying to. Here's the problem that we have with the federal government. Well, let me put it this way. How many of you think that if we cut out all the waste, fraud, and abuse, that'll balance the budget? I used to. Suppose we got rid of the Department of Education and the Department of Energy and all of the departments that have been created since the 1970s where we've actually gotten worse off, not better off with them in the various fields. Get rid of all of those. That doesn't begin. Here's the point. That doesn't begin to solve the problem. If we shut down the entire federal government, that's everything. That's the entire military, that's everything from the Department of Agriculture to the Department of the Interior, all of the parks, all of the government buildings, shut down Congress, close up the White House. Just so long and thanks for all the fish. If we shut down the entire federal government, we would still not balance the federal budget, because this entitlement spending is now consuming more than the entire revenues of the federal government combined. We could get close. We're running about a $1.5 trillion deficit. The entire federal government's about $1.3 trillion. But we couldn't balance the federal budget even if we shut down the entire federal government. That's the magnitude of the problem we've got. And let's go on to the next slide. I'm going to run through these pretty quickly here. This is the history of federal debt as a percentage of the economy, as a percentage of the GDP. As you can see, we hit an all-time high just at the end of World War II. Just over 100% of the entire economy we owed. That's something to think about, too. In the spring of 1945, there was very serious concern over whether we could continue the war effort, because we not only run out of money, bond sales were plummeting, the ability of the federal government to go out and simply borrow more money to keep the war going was now in grave doubt. At the end of that war, we were just over 100% of the economy. I'll talk about how we brought that down in a few minutes. But as you can see, we've started heading back up again pretty perilously in the last couple of years. Now, when you say, by the way, it's George Bush, let me tell you, I have nothing good to say about George W. Bush and the way he managed the nation's finances. He turned in, at the time, what were the worst peacetime deficits in the nation's history. He turned 4 years of surpluses into 8 years of deficits. Ran up $4 trillion of deficits in 8 years. This administration in just 3 years, has already run up $4 trillion of deficits. That's how bad the situation is. Now, according to the Congressional Budget Office, if that trend continues, in other words, if we do absolutely nothing, just, and again, these are CBO numbers, no changes in current law, just keep on the current path, here's what happens to debt as a percentage of the economy. Now, most of that is theoretical because it'll never get that high. When it gets up around 100, 150% or so, you'll watch the economy start to collapse just because of the weight of it. Why don't we keep going here? This will give you an idea of what's driving all of this. This is projected tax revenue. 18% is about the historic average. It doesn't matter what the tax rate is. Curious thing about that, whether it's really high or relatively low, different tax rates seem to generate about the same amount of revenue, about 18% of GDP. You can see Social Security is climbing, but not seriously. Medicaid's climbing quite a bit faster than Social Security, but that's not the principal problem. The problem is Medicare. That is growing completely out of control, and that's what we've got to get under control first if we're going to save our country and save the Medicare system. Why don't we go on? We'll go past that. Oh, okay, that's about it there. That gives you the overall big picture of what we're dealing with. The good news I can offer you is we know how to revive an economy because we've done it before. When people say that this is the worst economy since the Depression, I remember a time when we had not only double-digit unemployment, but double-digit inflation, mile-long lines around gas stations, interest rates at 21.5%. Perhaps we don't remember those times as vividly is because they didn't last very long. Ronald Reagan was elected. He diagnosed the problem very differently than this administration. You remember what he said in his inaugural address. He says, in this economic crisis, government is not the solution to our problems, government is the problem. Amen. He reduced the tax and regulatory burden that was crushing the economy, and he produced the biggest peacetime economic expansion in our nation's history. It's not the first time it's been done, and it's not necessarily a Republican policy. John F. Kennedy did the same thing in the early 1960s. Warren Harding did the same thing in the early 1920s. Bill Clinton, people forget, Bill Clinton reduced federal spending by a full 3% of GDP. He attacked entitlement spending. At the time, the thing that was driving it was runaway welfare spending. He attacked that issue. He ended welfare as we know it. A lot of my Republican friends says, well, yeah, but that was all forced on by a Republican Congress. Well, that's partially true, but give credit where credit's due. It happened on his watch. He turned in the only 4 budget surpluses in the last 40 years. It's kind of interesting. If you look at George W. Bush, he did exactly the opposite. Instead of reducing federal spending by 3% of GDP, he increased federal spending by 2% of GDP. He didn't reduce entitlements. He presided over the biggest expansion of entitlements since the Great Society. He turned budget surpluses into major budget deficits, began all of this nonsense about government stimulus spending. Remember those $600 checks we had? That was stimulus one. Remember that? That was supposed to revive the economy and get everything going. If deficit spending, massive increases in federal spending, massive increases in entitlements produce a healthy economy, the Bush administration should have ended with one of the great golden ages of the American economy. It did not. Remember what I said about the fact that just after World War II, we were at over 100% of our economy as debt. How did we get out of that? Do you ever remember what happened to get us out of that terrible situation? Harry Truman did. In 1945, Harry Truman abolished the excess profits tax. Harry Truman slashed federal income tax rates. In 1946, Harry Truman slashed the federal budget from $85 billion down to $30 billion in a single year. He fired 10 million federal employees.